Hi guys, welcome to the School of Bass podcast. Today I have with me Sahil Warsi. He's an old friend. I can call him a friend. I have hung out only a few times, but he was somebody we all looked up to because I think he was the one of the first upright bass players in Delhi. Then things happened for him in a different way. He took a different path, went to Berkeley, and that's a major part of this podcast that we'll be talking about how things happened there, so on and so forth. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure.
I'm feeling so happy. Just introduce yourself a little, tell people what you do, and talk about yourself just a little
Okay.
bit.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Sahil Warsi. I grew up in Delhi, like so many other bass players. I play the upright bass as well as the electric bass. I also play a decent amount of piano and drums. And I work and live as a professional musician in Massachusetts, in Boston, Massachusetts, which is where Berkeley is. I play a lot of gigs like Saurabh and like a lot of you do. And I also am the associate director for a music school that runs in New York and Boston as well.
Amazing. So, was this always the plan? Did you plan it out like this that I'm going to go abroad, study, and then settle out there?
I don't, to be honest with you, when I did my F1 interview, I fully did it with the idea that I was going to come back to Delhi. And I was like,
What's
yeah,
F1 interview? Sorry, I don't know what
oh, so
F1 is.
it's the student visa
The student
interview.
visa interview, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So it's like when I did that, I was like, yeah, for sure. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna see what it's like, but I'm probably gonna come back to Delhi. But then things just happened a little bit differently, and then you know how it is. You make plans, but things go differently.
Hmm. What
It's the
was that one
musician way.
thing? What was the one thing that you think that made you stay back in the States that you decided, okay, no, I don't want to go back. This is something I want to continue or hold on to. Do you remember
Yeah,
what it was?
yeah, of course. I mean, I think about it all the time. I think what really made the difference for me was just the sheer number of musicians because there's so many. It's a completely different culture just by like virtue of not only how many bass players there are, but how many musicians there are trying to do the same thing. It creates a really, really different atmosphere and this is not to say that there aren't lots of musicians in India, but it's a slightly different level of expectations and a slightly different level of execution, I want to say. Um, and more than anything, it just makes you grow very aggressively. Because for me, um, like you said, I didn't have that much competition in Delhi, so I got to act like I was really cool, like way cooler than I actually was. And I was getting to gig a lot, and suddenly I came here and I realized, wow, I really don't make the cut. And that realization made me push so much harder in the 3 years I was at school. I pushed harder than I was for the 5 years I was playing double bass before. And that's what really kept me here. And it still pushes me every day. It's like, wow, you really need to be performing at a super high level to make it happen.
It's interesting how we have all these strange feelings attached to the word competition and being competitive. If you think
Right.
about it, that's the only thing which drives you in a manner that you have to match the level of the competition everywhere you go, and then you build from there. So
Yeah.
it's interesting because when you're saying that the amount of work you were able to put in those 3 years, 5 years, the time period you mentioned, and how Sahil, can you see me? I think
Yeah,
you're
I can
frozen.
see you great. I can still hear
Okay,
and see you.
yeah. So I was
Yeah.
saying that how you had to in that short period of time you had to manage and reach a certain level of being part of the competition and then build from there or just
Hmm.
hang in that level. But the
Yeah,
minimum level is so high.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's something that you wanted to do for yourself, right? That I want to at least be this much. And
yeah.
then from there, it just, you made new plans. You decided that I'm going to stick around so that I become as good as everybody around.
Basically, I also, it's, and you can, I'm sure you can testify to this as much as I can. luck has so much to do with our careers as well, like being in the right place at the right time and stuff. And for me, while I was at Berkeley, I was very lucky in the way that I was exposed to some really, really cool opportunities. Um, the most sort of important one, in my opinion, was that I actually got hired as a bass accompanist for the piano department at Berkeley. I got hired as a bass accompanist for. They have this thing that I can tell you more about it, but called project bands. Basically, where students bring in their charts and they just put them in front of you, and you get maybe one take at a recording, like with a big band, and
Mhm.
then the students submit those charts. So it really pushes you to sight read. But there were all these things that I got to do and work with really high level faculty, and because of that, I kind of got a nice big push into the professional music scene in Boston as well. So, luck really did play a huge role in it. But yeah, that whole thing of being like, look, this is where the minimum level of competence is, which is pretty high. And then to be like, hey, okay, I've done this, and I really, this is what I want to do for a living. So you have to, like you said, build off of it.
Hmm. So you studied jazz composition, right, in Berkeley?
Yeah, I did jazz composition. I also did a dual major in performance. I did all my senior recital stuff for my performance. I did you had to present a little thesis and everything. I did all of that. But in the very last semester, I dropped out of performance, and I graduated only with jazz composition.
So if you had to summarize this for somebody who does not understand jazz and
Sure.
in a very basic way, that if one studies jazz composition, what are they signing up for exactly?
Sure, absolutely. So, one thing really important to note is that at an academic level, at a university level, if you study jazz composition, 9 out of 10 times, what that means is you're studying how to write for large ensembles.
Hmm.
So, you're basically learning how to write for big band or bands that are much larger than your typical trio and quintet. Basically, you're not writing lead sheets, you're writing arrangements and parts for large groups. Sorry, Bjorsen, can
No, I'm really
there
involved in
you
the conversation. I'm sorry, I'll
oh
keep
you
blinking my
were
eyes. I think
it's
when
all
you're
good.
tapping
Yeah.
or touching the table, the mic is catching it. So
Okay.
there's something
I
being
will
caught. So just be careful about that. It's going
okay,
loud.
thank you.
Sorry about that.
All right.
Yes, so you were
No,
saying
no, I'll try.
you're learning to write
Yeah.
how to write for a much bigger
Right.
band. Yeah.
Yeah. So at least so I can speak with some confidence with Berkeley, what they do over there is that your first semester is basically about writing lead sheets and starting to like write your own songs. So the first semester, they basically, your goal is to write, 15 or 20 tunes. And these are simple lead sheets, they're not arrangements. But while you're writing those tunes, you're also studying how to do basic arranging for horn sections.
Hmm.
So trumpets, saxes, so on and so forth. And then in the second semester, that's when you start breaking those up into larger ensembles. And that becomes your project for the second semester. It's like, okay, you're going to take an original tune, you're going to put it on top of this large ensemble, and you're going to record that. And at the end of your second semester, your final project is a 5 minute piece. Um, and we're talking about 5 minutes of content, not like 5 minutes of solos, because that's pretty easy. So yeah, and then in your third semester, which is your final semester with jazz composition, um, you write a 10-minute piece, which is a fully like large ensemble, large extended piece, which develops and goes places and needs to be kind of elaborate. So that's a typical layout of a jazz composition course at a music school.
And how many people would be there in this ensemble of yours when you did your 10-minute composition?
Of course. So when I did my 10-minute composition, I can send you a link to it as well. Um, it had, I want to say, 15 people in it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the the necessity and the requirement for all this is that you must know how to play piano, right? Only then you'll be able to write.
So, if you study jazz composition, part of the course is that you are going to take keyboard classes. You do take jazz piano fundamental classes. So, you basically have to pass keyboard proficiency exams. They're much simpler than like full-blown piano exams, but they're still pretty intense.
Very cool. And there's a huge role now that MIDI plays in terms of writing for horns, right? So
Yeah,
even
of
if you're
course.
not good at writing music as such, you can program it in MIDI, send it to MuseScore, and it kind of shifts everything to written notation. So is that something that Berkeley is putting any weight on, that this is the new way, this is the next technology, rather than spending time just sitting and writing each note down on a notation
Yeah,
software?
yeah. Of course, man. That's a super cool question. So as you know, we have a couple of colleagues in common, right, who've gone to Berkeley and done the thing. So one of the majors that Berkeley offers is called Contemporary Writing and Production. That's CWP.
Hmm.
And that's basically a jazz composition similar course, but as the name suggests, it's much more contemporary and it's much more software heavy. In a way, it's a much more practical thing to do if you want a job.
Right.
I'm not saying I regret it. I love the choices that I made. But that's definitely like a more secure and relevant option. Jazz composition is super cool, but we only use finale, and then there's a lot of emphasis on paper and pen. With jazz composition, the idea was you need to internalize those rules and you really need to know them. Whereas CWP was the same thing. They had, writing for big band and all of that, but they really emphasized on, okay, this is how you produce. If you need to write a jingle for a TV show, if you want
Hmm.
to write film music, I mean, they have film scoring as a separate major as well, but CWP was the same thing, but with a huge software focus. So if I would say if anyone's considering a writing track at Berkeley, and your goal is like I really want to have a job at the end of it, I would very strongly suggest a CWP course as opposed to jazz comp, which I
Nice.
loved.
So of course, there are a lot of self-trained people who have just written stuff, be it jingles, be it composition, or be it jazz sounding composition, like big
Hmm.
bandish compositions. So now you've
Yeah.
studied this deeply, and I want to hear from you. Do you hear a difference from people who are really deeply educated in this, and then there are the self-taught people? Or do you feel they're kind of close and the lines are kind of, diffused? It's not very clear.
Um, so it's kind of tricky. I think there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be these cats who can come in. And I have met a lot of them, like very talented, like men and women who haven't had jazz education, like in a formal setting, but just know how to arrange for big band. Like they know what to do, they know the sound. But in my opinion, there's not really those many of them.
Hmm.
I think that with a lot of people who try to just do it to mimic the sound, there are people who can do it, but eventually I would say that you can tell the difference. And it's very simple stuff that gives it away. Like they'll write a trombone line that's just like way too low. Like
Hmm.
software did it because there's no way a human being can make those sounds, right?
Right.
Or like you'll hear like minor seconds in the top two voices and stuff. And it's like, little things like that that don't really matter in the larger picture. But you know, I the difference I will say, the one thing I would clarify is that there's a difference between self-study and like just kind of winging it. I mean, if self-study means that someone goes and obviously it's a bit harder to do this in Delhi than it is here, but if they go to a library and they pick up big band scores and they study those charts and they look at how arranging is done
Hmm.
and then they write something, to me, yes, that is self study, but you did the relevant work and
Right.
you'll be able to hear that as opposed to being like, okay, I know ding kakading kakading makes jazz, so I'm going to put that in the drums and I just need a random trumpet sound, and that's a different thing.
Mm.
So I definitely do not want to knock someone who is doing the work, because if you do it, then like it doesn't matter if you do it at Berkeley, it doesn't matter if you do it you know at home, you're still doing the work. So that's really, that's cool.
So if somebody sits down religiously and decides to, let's say, everybody can't read, especially in our country, it's something very foreign to us.
Hmm.
And even when you know how to read, you don't get to read every day, so you forget. Your fluency is gone.
Yeah.
All the neural
Hmm.
circuits you have designed for yourself just disappears before you know. Because you're seeing the
Sure.
chart after 5 years or 4 years, and then, you just fall
Yeah.
on your face straight. So if there's
Uh,
somebody who's trying to study big band arrangements just by ear, and is
mhm.
really paying attention to the the ethos, the aesthetics, and how it's written, and is really going deep into it. Do you think there's a way for that guy to just step into the MIDI world, program stuff, and start sounding as genuine as the big band, the legend big band
Yeah.
arrangements?
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely don't see why that's not an option. I mean, my suggestion for that would just be to start simple, right? So a good example would be so like the project bands that I was talking about, the ones that they use to record student projects, the horn setup for that. Um, you'd have baritone sax at the bottom, followed by trombone, followed by tenor sax, followed by alto sax, followed by one trumpet, and sometimes two trumpets. So this is your six horn kind of setup, right?
Hmm.
And if you can write for these six horns, again, that's bari sax, trombone, um, tenor sax, alto sax, and one trumpet. Even if you want to write for those five horns, if you can make a decent chart for these five instruments, you can write for big band, no problem, because all a big band is just taking those five and then adding another two of each. So it's just like, so if you're playing with a MIDI program, toss in a trumpet, toss in those five instruments, and then find a chord that you like, and then see how you can distribute that chord to those instruments. That's what I tell my composition students, or my students in general that play piano. I'll say take a chord or a voicing that you really like. For instance, like if you want to take just a C major nine kind of thing. Yeah, so you have C, E, G, B, and D,
Right.
right? So you have this really simple chord with one tension, which
The
is the
nine.
nine, and you have a million different ways to spread this voicing or to voice it out. So what you can do, like in that kind of setup, shell voicing. So you can give, if you want, you can give your bari, sax, and your trombone a C and a B, the root and seventh, right? And then you can distribute the other tensions to your other instruments, and
Right.
you get this really, and then you start simple like that, but that's really all it is, right? It's
Hmm.
nothing fancy. Yeah.
It's just you got to build it brick by brick. That's
Yeah,
what you have
yeah.
to do.
Yeah, and there are a couple of like really simple rules I would be happy to share with you. Like it's literally a page of rules that I can send you a PDF of, and you can send it to your students if you want, of just like basic stuff of like ranges, like what is too low for what instrument, what is too high,
Right.
and then you're set. It's
Yeah,
done.
I think that can be found on the internet. Yeah, I mean, just
Yeah.
curiosity. Some is mine, and I'm sure some people who are listening, they are also curious about this. So, when you finished school, and of
Hmm.
course, it's a hefty fee, right? That one has to pay to go to Berklee College of Music, which
Sure.
spreads
Yeah.
over a period of 3 to 4 years and then has to be paid back. What
Hmm.
was your first thing after finishing college, that I finish college and I start doing the most musical thing, or do I look for a job and start thinking about repayments? Because you've shifted countries also now, and you're
Right.
also married now, and there's so much
Yeah.
responsibility, and all this.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, what was it like immediately? What are the priorities the moment you finish school? Because everybody joins music college and goes to music college. The the curiosity and the question I have for you, what happens immediately after your music college finishes?
Okay. So, I was very lucky because I got a pretty substantial scholarship from Berkeley. So it didn't exactly put me in too much of a place of financial hardship. Obviously, it was a lot, and I really, I can't thank my parents enough for helping me out the way they did. But thankfully, it was nowhere near a crazy sort of burden that way. The scholarship was substantial enough to cover quite a lot of that. But um, my emphasis as soon as I graduated was 100% I wanna do this for a living, and want I need to make money, right? So for people who are looking at the US as an option to study, when you graduate, you're basically given 1 year. It's called OPT, which is optional practical training or whatever. It gives you 1 year to stay in the country and to work within the field. So, and this is a part of your student visa. If you paid your tuition, if you passed all your classes, if you graduated from the college, you can apply for 1 year of OPT, and then that gives you 1 year that you can stay in the country and legally work, but it has to be in your field. So if you go to music college, you can't graduate and work as I don't know, anything that's not related to music somehow.
Right.
So my emphasis when I graduated was I need to stay in the field and I need to make money. I want to be able to pay rent by myself. Um, and I don't want to, I don't want to like nudge my parents for money and be like, "Hey guys, like, what's going on?" So that was my thing. And that's kind of how I actually approached the solution to the thing as well. So I got a job pretty much as soon as I graduated. I worked as what was it? It was like a assistant music director for this place called the West End House, which is a nonprofit working with basically with underserved kids and like kids from like basically immigrant communities and poor communities in the States. And like I helped run the music department, so basically lessons and like that kind of thing. I did that for I want to say about a year and a couple of months.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's where my thing was, because I was gigging like consistently, but it's like it's it needed a little bit more to pay rent.
Yes,
It's
of
like
course.
rent is Boston on top of that. Like that's kind of the problem with the States, for like your students and like people watching who are considering it, is that the most well right now with COVID it's all up in the air, but the cities that tend to have the most music also tend to be the most expensive cities. So it's like it's a weird kind of paradox that way, because it's like where does everyone want to be? They want to be all the film scoring people and all the contemporary musicians, the people who want to be like in the pop scene, they all go to LA. All the jazz musicians, they either want to be in like Boston, but most of them want to be in New York. So it's like Boston, LA, New York. It's just like the most expensive places in the whole country. So it's like, okay. And much like India, the one thing India and the US have in common is like performance rates for musicians haven't changed that much since like the 1970s, 1980s. They're kind of like um, so it can be an interesting thing to navigate.
Hmm. Yeah, in India right now, actually, Bombay rates go up almost every couple of years. For
That's
me,
awesome.
myself, I try and I do actually take my rate up every year, even if it is
Hmm.
by a little bit.
Yep.
Unless I'm working with the same people or something like that. But if a new musician approaches, but Bombay is good that way in terms
Yeah.
of you can propose a new rate, you can discuss, negotiate, and take. It's not really dependent on just what's paid. But again, it's Bollywood, so funds are not an issue here for some reason because
Yeah.
it's the biggest entertainment industry of our country, which has billions and millions of people. So, of course,
Yeah.
tons of revenue comes in if they have to pay a little extra to somebody, so it's different. But I haven't lived in the States, but I did visit New York and LA at some point. And somehow I drew a comparison between uh, Delhi being like New York and LA being like
Sure.
Mumbai. Do you feel that way? Do you think there's something you can relate to when I say that, or do you think it's all bullshit I'm saying?
I'm actually not that familiar with LA. I haven't been there since I was a kid, so I really can't really comment
Okay.
on LA culture. Um, but New York, I mean, I do feel like the one thing New York and Delhi have in common is that they're massive and they're super fast-paced and they're
Hmm.
really aggressive cities. I tried to, before the pandemic, I was doing my best to play a gig in New York one or two times every 2 or 3 months. It just kept me super honest. The level of musicianship, especially with jazz musicians in New York, is very, very high. Uh, Unfortunately, what keeps me and other musicians I know from moving to New York is while this is all pre-COVID, obviously. While there's lots and lots of venues in New York, there's lots of gigs to be had. The pay vibe in New York is very, very sad. It's like it's just not
How much
livable,
is
and
it
it's
per
kind of
gig there
unfortunate.
right now?
So, man, it's
A club gig.
from my friends. Yeah, yeah, club gig from my friends who I know have graduated master's programs in New York. A club gig, like they'll basically, unless you're in that top percentile, you're looking at uh, somewhere between 20 and $30, 20 and thirty
Right.
dollars for the night
That's
for like a 3 4 hour gig. Yeah.
And then even if you play every day, it's you can't live off that.
It's Yeah, not in New York. Because then if you think about how much the rent is,
That's
and
true.
so all these guys have like either they're teaching or they're doing something. I mean, it's the same in Massachusetts, but like a club gig will pay at least $100.
Yes, that's what I heard about New York
So
last
it's like,
time when I think it's been at least 5, 6 years that's when I heard
yeah.
about the $100 rate being in New York. Because there was this time when I was trying to figure out, I was planning to move to Canada. And so
Sure.
that's when I was kind of doing my research on which city pays how much money when it comes to gigs. That's
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
discovered all this. So, in terms of competition, coming back to that point, and there's also this feeling which a lot of musicians I've heard who go from India or other cities or countries where music, Western music particularly, is not, of course, part of our culture. Reaching Berklee
Hmm.
College of Music or MI is an environment which is very intimidating to people, that they are suddenly kind of shocked as to what kind of level people are already at and how much work one has to do to reach there. When you reached college for the first time, did you feel all these things, that what the hell is happening, and did you feel that something sank inside you, or were you fine, you were ready to fight and go to the war?
I think it was much more the latter. For me, I'm not, it's a funny thing because when you get to Berkeley, you take placement exams, and the placement exams will sort of, pigeonhole you with people who are sort of at the same level as you. So then the next thing you have to do is work super hard to make sure you're exposing yourself to that much higher level of musician. But it's all around. I mean, you could hear it in the practice rooms and stuff. I don't think I found it discouraging. I think that, when I knew that I was gonna go, that was just gonna be that was just gig. Like there's no way that wasn't gonna happen. So I do want to say I was to some extent mentally prepared for it, but there's also like a big leap of faith where you're like, it's gonna work out. Yeah, I mean, you're lying to yourself, but that's kind of like what it is. Yeah, I mean, you tell yourself every day, you're like, yeah, it'll be cool, it'll be cool. And then, if you keep pushing, the one thing that I will say that all the playing that I did in Delhi, that experience playing, whether it was like playing with Drift or playing with like anybody, like when playing with all those like really cool people in Delhi. Um, the one thing that it really, really did for me was that I just wasn't that scared when I got to Berkeley.
Hmm.
Um, and I was really ready to put myself in very uncomfortable situations where, even at times there were places where I was like, I probably shouldn't have been there, but hey, here I was. And it's like, once you're there, you kind of have to throw that caution to the wind and you kind of have to not be scared. And I noticed this a lot with not so much American musicians, but a lot of the Japanese and Korean kids who are and kids from other places too, but who were like incredible musicians. They were phenomenal players. But they're like, I'm not going to do that ensemble. I'm just not ready. I'm not going to do this class. I'm just not ready. I'm not ready for the professor to hear me. I'm not ready for this.
Hmm.
And it's like they probably played better than me then than now. But, and then I was there being like, I'll make a mistake, like I really care. And I think that was something that was very Indian, and I don't think I could have survived Berkeley without it. And I would really recommend that, like, anybody who's thinking of like, oh yeah, it's scary. It's only music, man. Like the worst thing that's gonna happen is you're gonna make an ass of yourself, and that's not such a bad thing. Like
Yeah.
it's cool. Yeah.
I think everybody falls on their faces. Sometime you will, because if you're trying something new, things don't come out right. Like, doesn't
Yeah.
matter how much you have practiced at home. It doesn't matter
Of course,
because
yeah.
yeah, you reach the stage, people are looking at you. Then there's the added factor of humiliation of playing something wrong, and then there's somebody you look up to, or if there's somebody you think is going to judge you, then
Yeah.
your playing will change. But
Mm-hmm.
that's, I've said this a few times on the podcast that I'm pretty shameless that way, in
Yeah.
taking chances. I don't mind playing wrong stuff.
Yeah.
I'll take that chance, but now it's kind of become almost like a superpower. Doesn't mean I don't prepare, but
Of
I
course.
know that I have to cross certain fears. I have to cross certain hurdles to be able to stand up and say, okay, I'm going to play a solo piece right here and just
Yeah.
just by myself. Things like
Yeah.
that. It's pretty difficult to go through the process, but there's no other way around it. That's something.
Unfortunately, yeah. You're right. There is no secret route. It's just you gotta pound through. Yeah.
So at the moment, like pre-COVID times, were you gigging and doing your teaching? What's your job exactly right now, after finishing? Now it's been 4 years. You shifted jobs
Yeah.
in the middle. What was the process
I
after
yeah.
that?
So in terms of my performing career, I've been performing pretty consistently since I graduated. Obviously, COVID stuff notwithstanding. I was playing a lot of classical music. So I was playing with a few orchestras in Massachusetts. Some of that work was paid pretty well. There was an orchestra that I sat the principal position for bass. So that was a pretty cool gig. And then there are other orchestras where I was just in the section, and that's not paid, but it's kind of like eating your vegetables, so it's really good for you. So that was one thing. A lot of my income for performance was coming from playing musical theater. So I was playing a lot of musical theater.
Okay.
Um, some of my career highlights in Massachusetts and in the US have been from musical theater. I've done work with a couple of big theater companies, including the American Rep Theater. So it's like they'll sign a contract with you for a month, basically. So it's like you're
Hmm.
doing the same show 4 or 5 nights a week for a whole month, sometimes longer. So, they send you the book and you learn the book, and then that's a pretty consistent way of getting money. And then I was doing a lot of work with jazz ensembles. I was
Hmm.
playing a lot with there's this Berkeley teacher, her name's Olivia Perez. She does like kind of like flamenco jazz kind of stuff. I was playing with her a lot. And then I have my own trios and quartets that I was gigging with a lot as well. So
Right.
that was my performance stuff. In terms of the professional career, so I worked at that nonprofit for a while, but now I work basically as an assistant director for a music school, just private lessons. So I have my own roster of students through that school, but I also help run that school, and that's in New York and in Boston as well. So it's
Okay.
those two things that are going
Just kind
side
of
by side.
juggle around a little and kind of
Yeah,
improvise in that field also.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you say principal bass player and principal timpani player, what does it exactly mean in a symphony orchestra? Because I don't understand the language
Of
properly.
course,
So
of
would you tell
course.
it to me and of course to the people who are listening?
Yeah, yeah. So in normal orchestra, there's a bass section, just like there's a violin section, and there's a section of each instrument, which basically means that you have a number of people playing the same instrument. So in a double bass section, you can have as many as 11 bass players, or you can have as few as three or two or four. Now, what the principal does is basically they decide what the bowing of the piece is going to be, and they're basically like the medium between like the conductor and then the rest of the section. So if you're the principal bass player, you write out the bowings in everybody's music. You're like, okay, you have say you have a section of music, and you can decide, okay, this is going to be up, down, down, up, whatever you want with your bow, and everyone in the section has to follow the same bowing because
Hmm.
otherwise it sounds different. And then if you're the principal, you take care of the bowings, but you're the one watching the conductor.
Hmm.
If you're in the section, you're watching the principal. That's
Okay.
kind of that vibe. It's like you're leading your section as how to interpret what the conductor is doing, but also how to like understand your music. And you have the freedom to make some changes like that. Yeah.
Wow. It's interesting,
Yeah, it was
man.
cool. Hmm.
I'm playing with a full symphony orchestra this next Saturday, I think. It's 19th
Super
actually.
cool.
So
Super
it's
nice, man.
yeah, it's going to be the first. I played with string sections otherwise, but not like a full-fledged thing that you're mentioning. But this is going to be a full experience for me, first time. It's a short
Amazing.
15-minute thing, but I'm playing
Yeah,
electric bass, so
that's
I
cool.
don't know.
Well, it's still awesome.
What's sorry?
Who's the orchestra?
I think
What
it's
is the
called
orchestra?
Symphony Orchestra of India. It's
Okay,
they
yeah,
rehearse in NCPA. Have you played for them when you
yeah.
were here?
I haven't played for them, but I know who runs that vibe.
So NCPA is basically coming alive again, and I think they're doing a little
Hmm.
gig in their lawns, and that's what this is
Yeah,
for. So I need to check the details, whatever is going to happen. When you were in Delhi, were you playing any electric bass?
yeah. I actually started playing electric bass. I started with like rock and roll and stuff, man.
This
Like I
in
was doing
in Delhi
the
you were playing or not?
Yeah, in Delhi, I mean, I grew up there, so I was playing electric bass in the beginning, but I have to play a lot of electric bass now. I just took a very long break in the middle, um, and now the expectation if you're a bass player here is like if you do upright, unless you're like a full-fledged classical musician, you should be able to play electric. They just expect it now. Um, but yeah, I did the whole I played with like a couple of rock bands and stuff. I wasn't good at it, but I still did it.
Wow.
That's how I got into playing bass.
For a musician, whenever we think education, it mostly starts revolving around jazz standards and analyzing tunes and how the movement of the chords is this and that. Do you feel it's
Mhm.
something one can't do without if one decides not to study jazz and is not in love with jazz? How much do you think is he or she is missing on if they don't study jazz and just focus on other art forms or other genres altogether?
You know, I, I'll tell you what I tell my students. I mean, I always tell a few of them, I'm not here to make you like a jazz musician. I'm not forcing you to do this. But jazz is like a really good gym. Like it's a really, really good workout. And it's like if you get really comfortable with jazz harmony and just the familiarity it makes you have with, not just with theory, but with sound, really. If you're in control of jazz harmony, then it's going to make everything else seem a lot easier. You don't have to do it. I don't think it's like you're missing out anything like massive, but it's just good for you. And it's the same thing with classical music. And I can say that for jazz musicians, especially jazz upright players who are like, should I learn how to play stuff, like on the bass that's like classical? Am I really missing out if I don't? And it's like, well, yes, you're missing out because it's like a really cool form of music and there's all this stuff. But if you hate it, then you hate it, and that's okay. That's okay. But okay, the way I like to think about it is to say, what are you going to get from like practicing this discipline? That's kind of what it is.
Mm,
So for me, as a predominantly jazz musician, what I get from playing classical music or like studying it is that there's so much attention to detail, which doesn't exist in jazz. I don't care what anyone says, like it just doesn't exist. Like playing pits on the upright bass is so much more forgiving than playing a passage with the bow. Like your intonation and all that stuff when you play with the bow, it's so much more amplified. So there's all this like attention to detail.
mm,
So that's why I do the classical stuff as well. It's like it makes my jazz playing better. And so to answer your question, I'd say, if you really like, if your heart's set against like, oh, I hate jazz, I never want to listen to it. Okay, man, that's cool. Like, that's all right. Like, jazz will be fine without you, and you will be fine without jazz. But it might make the rest of your life much easier if you, like, especially if you're in a related style. Like if
mm.
you're playing R&B, if you're playing funk, if you're playing the blues, then it might do you some good to like push yourself. But if not, then okay, it's cool. If you're playing like punk rock, man, like go for it.
It's true. It's true. Not necessary to jump into what you don't like, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was about to ask you this only, but I think you already answered it. That I was just wondering, what is it that's different between playing? Because when a lot of upright jazz bass players just play upright, it's
Yeah.
so many times that the intonation is out.
Yeah.
But then when you're saying that people who play Western classical more, they have much nicer and much cleaner intonation on the upright bass. Christian McBride plays a lot of classical music because his intonation sounds kick-ass to me, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really, really sounds amazing. Is he really into classical music as a practice?
He talks about, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure there's a couple of interviews where he talks about his Julian playing like, etudes and excerpts and stuff. He's done his work. He's done a lot of his classical work. Same thing with Ron Carter. Ron Carter was he was a symphony bass player first.
Hmm. Wow,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. And it's like, for upright players, like it's not necessarily classical music as much as it is play your scales with the bow, play your arpeggios with the bow, do your bow work, because that's a thing. But yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing.
In terms of playing electric and upright, do you find yourself attacking the electric bass a little too hard than a regular electric bass player would, or have you kind of found the balance out?
Um, to me, I honestly treat them as two completely separate instruments that have very little to do with each other. Because there's such little overlap in technique, as far as I'm concerned. Um, Getting back into playing the electric, and the reason why I was getting back into playing the electric was mostly for musical theater, because like most musical theater will have a combination of upright bass and electric bass, and you have to switch between the two depending on the pieces. Um, my challenge was, when you play upright, you're not really looking at the neck, and suddenly I can see my hands, and I'm like, oh, you know, I probably shouldn't be doing. So, it took a little bit of time for me to like readjust and really kind of have faith in myself, saying like, okay, I don't need to look at this fretted neck,
Hmm.
with all its frets and stuff. And but no, I just treat them as two separate instruments that I have to practice separately. To me, there's really no relation. When I play electric, it's nice sometimes to be like, okay, boom, and the note just keeps ringing, man. I'm just like, oh, this is beautiful. Like I didn't have to do like anything, and I don't have to worry about intonation. Like, boom, that's a C. It's just a C. That's where it's at. So yeah, I mean, it's but they're two completely different instruments, in my opinion.
It's true. I'm waiting for my urge to come to play an upright. Because
Yeah.
I I thought about it once, but I'm still trying to I don't want to do stuff because it's right to do it. Because that's the suggestion and advice I've gotten from many jazz cats that, hey man, if you really want to play electric right, you got to play upright bass also. But I don't
I
find
don't
the
think that's
relationship. Yeah, I don't find the
I don't think
relationship
that's
in there.
true at all.
It's
Yeah, I
completely
don't agree
different.
with that. It's completely different. Yeah.
It- It's very, very
Yeah.
different. Sitar is very
It
interesting that way. Sitar,
Mhm.
you gotta
Yeah.
talking about the neck, the way you see the neck. So sitar, you
Hmm.
actually see the neck from behind.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I've held one. Yeah, yeah.
you know how it's tied from using a
Hmm.
fishnet kind of a thing,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
wire, and you
Hmm.
can see it from behind. Where your thumb is basically what you're holding as a fret.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is pretty interesting. Man, I
Yeah.
really wonder, for upright bass players in particular, that is it easier to play the fretless if you have a choice to like just switch from electric to right away to fretless? And like why asking you this is because when I hear Christian McBride play fretless five string, there's something phenomenally fantastic about it. It's really it's not the Jaco or the Gary Willis sound. It's some other
Hmm.
sound, and
Yeah.
I don't know if a regular electric bass player can get that sound out of the fretless.
You know, two things. Christian McBride's just and dude's insane. Like he's insane. I mean, like we were talking about way back a little while ago when we were talking about people who just seem to be able to write for big band. Christian McBride, in my opinion, is one of those people who was never really like he didn't really identify as a big band writer. Here comes along this guy and he writes this big band arrangement album, like this album full of big band arrangements, and the thing wins a fucking Grammy. Like and it sounds amazing. It's an incredible album. But yeah, like I feel like Christian McBride's kind of in a little league of his own. Um, I haven't played a fretless electric bass yet. I've actually never played one. But I will say that I feel playing upright would predispose you to playing fretless because you're used to playing by spacing and playing by muscle memory and being like, okay, this is the space between two notes, and you know how to make those adjustments if you come in too sharp or you come in too flat. You're just like you move your finger a little bit. So I mean, in that sense, I would say the mechanics are the same in terms of like producing a sound that is the pitch that you want.
Hmm,
Um, but yeah, I wish I could say more. I just don't know fretless bass that well.
get it. Uh,
Yeah.
After finishing school, especially something like composition, do you feel that because a lot of people do the same routine, same structures of education, same tools are given to everybody? Do you feel when they produce their homeworks or their assignments, do they almost sound the same to you at times that just because they've had the similar kind of education happening all these years?
I think that, you know, I honestly didn't really hear it so much in my jazz composition classes. I feel like everyone was so aware of that feeling that they were trying their best to make something that didn't sound like it. And then by trying to not sound like it, they all kind of sound like it. It's kind of tricky. Uh, I wouldn't say that that was something I noticed, but what I did notice um, in my colleagues who were performance majors, actually, well, there's a very, very marked difference between how you play when you're in school and how you play once you graduate as a professional musician, especially as a bass player, especially as a drummer, especially as an accompanying instrument. That's a very big change that happens when you're at school. You're playing as academic. You are trying your best to like, I don't want to say show off, but kind of show off. And then when you graduate, you're like, "Ooh, this shit's not gonna fly." Like I gotta like play a good quarter note. Like I can't keep like sticking, I can't keep doing all these things. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, yeah. Um, but what you did say that it's super relevant. I think that is a tricky thing with music education. You know, ultimately there is no substitute for going out in the field and working. There's no substitute for playing with a lot of people because that's kind of how you develop your own sound. After a while, like the whole jazz education thing, I mean, it's kind of made up, right? Like, I mean, music education in general. Um, all it can do is give you a set of tools, and it gives everybody, like you said, the set of tools. But whether you have a successful career or not is completely in your hands. And I think you realize that. I'm sure you realize that as a teacher as well as a student. Is like when you're a student, you kind of have this feeling that like, oh, I'm going to study with this person, and that's going to like change everything. And then you realize, no, I mean, they can help, but whether you're going to have a career or not is 100% based on your networking, your hard work, your practicing, right?
Yeah. And
You
sometimes
know?
it's just, clarity of thought. That's what
Yeah.
something I've been discovering recently, that now I start giving trial lessons before taking a student on board. And what I'm
Hmm.
discovering is that the people I'm talking to, they can actually play, but they're
Hmm.
confused about where do we go from here? What's
Sure.
the next step? How do I
Yeah.
position myself? Like they don't understand the importance of positioning yourself by putting out your
Yeah.
music, your covers, whatever you can put out. Whatever
Yeah.
you can let people know that this is what I sound like. This is how I talk on my instrument. These are
For
my
sure.
skills. So basically, when I type your name on YouTube, I can figure out what does Sahil Varsi do and what's his sound.
Hmm.
And tomorrow,
Yeah.
if I have a gig, I'll exactly know, okay, I need to call this guy. So
Hmm.
similarly, I'm just kind of telling them those parts that it's not the playing that you're confused about. Your ear is fine. Like
Yeah.
today only, I was just doing a trial lesson and I was experimenting with his ear just to see, is a student, that particular guy, is he in the capacity of teaching himself? And he's absolutely brilliant. I played a chord,
Yeah.
asked him to sing a sharp 11. He was on, sings flat sevens, whatever. Everything was in place. And then I told him play a groove. He was grooving. It was all good. Technique is nice. Everything's fine. But the
Yeah.
confusion was this psychological warfare, that what do I do
Sure.
next and how do I move forward? And man, you are one of those few people who actually stayed back and didn't get confused, because I can literally count so many of my friends that I know who went to some school, either got confused or even I would go to the extent got degraded in their playing, because the confidence disappeared completely when
Sure.
they went to
Yeah.
another country altogether, because there's so much to deal with, right? It's not just education.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
understand the culture. You have to do everything by yourself, and it's not even that. Like if we go to something which is not America, or one of the Americas
Right.
actually, where you have to spend
Right.
so much money, we still have the back of our heads, we know that the parents are there, they'll help you out, so on and so forth. But here you get
Mm.
this whole attack that, oh my God, what am I going to do? How did you maneuver through this, man? I mean, the psychological aspect is something I'm curious about, that a lot of people break down when they go out.
Right.
You gave me
Yeah.
a brief answer about it, that you decided for yourself otherwise because you kind of knew that it's going to be challenging. But then getting this attack on you every day of responsibilities, of um, basically having to make it work without failing, like
Right.
how did you make it happen on a daily basis?
Um, yeah, I think it's a combination of things, or at least that worked for me. I I would say the most important thing that I did was I set very small goals. I sometimes, especially when I was in the thick of school, um, I think it was very much a day-to-day kind of existence where the goal for the day was basically to make it till like the end of the day. And I don't mean that in like a super dramatic, like, oh, am I going to survive kind of way, but it's just like, okay, I have XYZ to get through. If I get through XYZ, that's a success, and today's been a success, and I have like I'm gonna go get like my favorite food and I'm gonna drink like my beer or whatever, and it's gonna feel incredible. And I think you just have to do that. It's like that's what worked for me. It's like keeping it day to day and then keeping things in perspective. I think there's a balance to be had between like um being like, okay, this is where I came from. This is where I need to get. And you need to also somewhere in there acknowledge, okay, this is my comp where they're at. And it's
Hmm.
just keeping a balance between all of those things. At some point, I kind of just realized, and I really hope all my students and all your students realize that beating yourself up, like nothing comes from that. Like nothing comes from that. Like sitting in a corner being like, "Oh, I sound like shit." Even if it's true, like man, that like why? Like this I get it. I get like the human nature aspect of that, but not one productive thing comes from that feeling.
Hmm.
If you can use it to motivate yourself and then you're practicing and you're doing the work, okay, not the healthiest approach, but at least it's something is coming from it. But nine out of 10, man, if you're feeling like if that impulse that you've seen in people that we know, yeah, it's gonna stop you in your tracks, right? Like you're done. Um, so I think for me it was just small goals, and not beating myself up and just being
Hmm.
like, yeah, yeah.
So
Uh,
what's forward? What's after this? What are you looking at now after the COVID period ends? Do you have any
God,
specific goals for yourself?
I was, I don't know. I think for all the musicians, my colleagues, my friends in Massachusetts right now, and in the US, really, um, we really don't know what's coming next. There's really no end in sight. Like I had a gig last week, and it just felt so weird. But I had a couple of really cool musicals scheduled for this year, um, that have now tentatively been rescheduled to next year.
Hmm.
Tentative, I hope they happen. One of them was in San Francisco, so I was looking forward to doing a little bit of traveling with it. Um, but we'll see. I mean, right now, I would say more than ever, we're back in that day-to-day place where I know anything good. So I'm keeping it one day at a time right now.
Very
But
cool, man.
hopefully, yeah, just play more, have more fun.
It's good to talk to you for so long. I mean, we haven't had a word properly ever, and this
Yeah, I'm
this has
good.
just been incredible, actually. I've been smiling throughout. You've seen my face, but of course the camera is not showing me throughout. But this has been fun, man.
Now the pleasure is all mine, Saurabh. Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm extremely proud to tell everybody that I know you and
Oh
all the
man,
great things you
come
have done. It's just makes me so happy that somebody went from here as a bass player, that to upright bass player, and found his place outside and is working hard to stay there and make things happen for themselves. This has been amazing. I'm coming to the States 2021 around August or something. I'll be in
Where are you
Boston.
gonna be? Oh, cool.
Um, so first I have to go to Nashville to say hi to Mr. Wooten, and
All right.
yeah, I was supposed to go this year, 2020, to the Wooten Woods camp, and I
Oh,
paid the
cool.
booking fee and everything, but it got cancelled because of COVID. But I think it's pushed to next year now, so I'm going to go,
Yeah,
and we'll come to Boston. So Vasundhara studies with Mark, this voice coach. I don't know if you know about him. I don't know his full name, but
yeah.
pretty cool guy. So I think she's gonna come pay a visit to him. So we'll connect, man.
Great.
I'll ping you and we'll have a cup of coffee or whatever.
I look forward to that. Thank,
Thank you so much, man. This has been fun.
thank you,
I'm just
sir.
stopping the recording. Thanks a ton for coming to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. Bye.